Welcome to the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel McDermott, and I'm joined this evening from beautiful Paris, or just outside Paris, by John Wilson from Onlinevents, who's a mate that goes back many years now. So I haven't seen you in bloody ages. Last time I saw you was we went for a meal round here, I think, over in Stokey, where I live. Went to that very odd sort of weird restaurant that should be Michelin starred, but isn't. It's just a sort of strange outgrowth in Hackney. But that was ages ago, John.
It was, wasn't it? And the food was amazing, and it was a warm summer
really
night.
Extraordinary restaurant. So it's a bizarre sort of find in the middle of Hackney.
Yes.
But lovely to see you. I'll jump into a conversation with you in just 1 second. I just want to sort of say hi to everybody and just remind you it's a live show. You're welcome to join in. We're streaming on various platforms, so Facebook Live, on Periscope, and on YouTube. Drop any comments in there and my team will message them over to me, because I can't do more than one thing at the same time. Every time I try and look on these streams and talk, I'm like some old codger caught in the headlights of something. So they'll message, or you can call 07506 319 745. That's +44 7506 319 745. Coming through on WhatsApp. Be great to hear from you. Join in with us. So that's that bit done. I don't need to do any more of that. That's good. John, welcome.
Thank you, Noel.
I love the sitting room. Yes. It looks a bit like you've invaded IKEA or something.
Absolutely, that's right. This is my virtual background that I take with me wherever I go. So I was saying my students wind me up that I've broken into an IKEA somewhere. This is
It's great. It's great. I mean, it's the best virtual background I've seen in terms of the most realistic, actually. It actually looks very real, but I guess you're an old pro in the online game, aren't you? So you must have tweaked this one to perfection, I guess.
Yes. Well, I have to give Fabienne, my partner, the credit for this image. She trawled the photograph sites looking for different kinds of images, and this was the closest to a kind of therapeutic space, kind of friendly space. Could almost imagine having clients in here, but the thing is, the plants don't grow very fast and it always looks tidy, so that's just perfect for me.
But the sort of plants that would survive me, I think. Because I am known for sort of mass destruction of they call me deforestation Noel.
Okay.
So the only way I'd live. But and how have things been for you for this last year in terms of the COVID and coronavirus stuff? I mean, have you been in France that whole time?
We've had most of the time in France. Our life before COVID was kind of a couple of weeks in France, a couple of weeks in Sheffield for our psychotherapy training program. But of course, that all went online when the pandemic hit. So we spent most of the time here in France. We've managed to make a couple of trips to the UK and another one due, but it's a bit complex at the minute, as we were just talking. So
complex and expensive, I'm telling you.
Yes.
That's a lot of money and a lot of regulations to follow.
Yes.
I've been having to nip backwards and forwards to see my son and sort him out and get his school sorted out. So it's real hoop jumping times at the moment. Necessary, I guess, but there you go.
Yeah.
So you run Onlinevents and Temenos, is it training?
Yeah, Temenos Education.
Temenos,
Yes. Yeah.
So tell us about them. So let's just get a little sense of what you've been doing for the last few years.
Yeah, well, thank you, Noel, for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of these projects. Temenos Education has been training people to work as a counsellor, psychotherapist since 1993. So it's nearly at 30 years. I joined back in 2010 and been running the business and training in the business. And currently, Fabienne and I work in the diploma program. So we run small groups one of the things that's so exciting about that is that we train without a curriculum, which is a real radical kind of way of doing things. We hark back to the days of Carl Rogers and the person-centered educational philosophies. So just love that kind of group experience and folding the knowledge and the education into the group experience. And it allows us to, I guess, fit the knowledge in when the students are ready for it. Yeah.
And Carl Rogers is person-centered, is that correct? No?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So he would be the founding father, I guess, if you like, of that approach to psychotherapy.
And tell us about sort of person-centered. What is that? I mean, I guess most people would sort of assume that all therapy is person-centered, isn't it?
Yes.
One would assume that you would sort of seems to be, but why is sort of form of therapy called person-centered?
Yeah, well, in a way it is. I think Carl Rogers was talking about the conditions that create growth or facilitate growth in the human organism. And I think he wrote that as long as those conditions are there, all the other approaches work. But there will be a common kind of description of the atmosphere that would have empathy in it, would have an authenticity in it. So yeah, and well, person-centered philosophy takes many different guises, I guess. And there's some colleagues who would just work only in that kind of, as long as the conditions are there, don't do anything else. There's nothing else to do with the client. And of course, there's many what have come to be described as tribes of the person-centered approach, where people have folded other ways of working into that philosophy. Yeah.
So I think Carl, didn't he talk about the idea that there was within people the seed of their authentic self, and that the idea was to provide the soil and the nutrients and the support to allow that seed to naturally grow?
Absolutely. And we would say our training is more, it's like the environment is of that person-centered philosophy. We're not actually training people to be person-centered, which a lot of courses would be doing. So we're more interested in, with each student, who are they, and like, how are they going to be a therapist? So that, so everybody emerges from our program obviously unique and hopefully more authentically themselves, because that's really what makes a difference as a therapist, that we're absolutely able to be ourselves, whatever modality that we're
and I guess training people to be person-centered is a bit of a contradiction in terms, isn't it? You can
complete contradiction,
and allow people to emerge as authentic healers. I guess that would be where you're at.
Absolutely. It's the idea of turning into a disciple of a belief system or an ideology.
The biggest damage on the planet is people believing stuff too much, and not being able to let go, and just sort of, and just let be as well, that whole thing. And where does it fit in terms of, evidence-based practice and that sort of stuff? I guess if you're talking about folding things in, that's no big deal. If you want to include some CBT into your practice, or DBT, or whatever it is, that's cool.
Well, absolutely. And it's like, does it sit in a congruent way with the practitioner? And I think we all end up being ourselves, and especially when we're under stress, which can happen, the client's in a real mess, and, we're right up against it as a therapist. We all end up doing what we do. So we're trying to really strengthen those muscles. Like, what is it that person already has? And then what can they build onto that to support that? So in those moments that that's what shines through ourselves. And if we've really worked on that, as opposed to erecting some kind of structure that we kind of try and operationalize, because when when the going gets tough, all that stuff comes apart. And we've just got ourselves with our clients, so we may as well work on that.
Yeah, and sort of a previous supervisor of mine said sometimes it's just about surviving, and sort of get through it. I had an experience like that today, actually, with somebody, with a client where all I had was me in the end, because they were very angry about something, which is I understood, but it's like, well, I can just offer this.
Yes.
Do you want it?
Yes.
And of course, my anxiety, my people pleasing meant that I was anxiously before the meeting going, well, could I do this? Could I do that? And sort of in the end, it was just me, and I'll do the best I can. And that's about it, really. And let's be honest about that, and let's get real. And do you want to give that a go or not? It's okay, whichever way you want to go. So I think that's right. I also do think, as you know, it's also there is the craft that goes with it, and learning the craft, and learning the tools and resources, and sort of and getting to know. I guess my sort of where my heart goes in terms of authentic practice is that whole idea that I think it's really important we try the stuff out in ourselves first.
Yes.
It's like,
yes.
Before you go out into the world and start telling other people how to get well, it's like, figure out how difficult it bloody well is first. Do you know what I mean? Because it's hard work. Personal change is bloody hard work. So, which you know about, and if we can sort of do that wiggle back in time thing, maybe, because I have known you for a long time. I sort of, I think you invited me up to Scotland once. Very early days of my recovery from alcoholism, actually, and when I was still hot to trot and all that sort of stuff, and you gave me a great platform, and I was very grateful for it, and we've stayed friends since, and I've seen you on a sort of personal and social level, so I know something about your story, which is a really interesting story. Tell me about John, where he comes from, and your background. You're obviously Scottish. People are guessing.
How did you guess? How did you guess? It's that very eloquent accent, isn't it? Yes. Well, I spent most of my time in Scotland, I guess, growing up and working. But when I was 2, my parents joined a religion called Jehovah's Witnesses, which might be known to some of the colleagues and viewers, and that really was most of my childhood and well into my adulthood, I guess. So I'm now what is known as an ex-JW. I'm disfellowshipped, or I guess the term outside the JW would be I've forgotten. There's also a term like that for the Catholic faith, but excommunicated, I think, is what it is. So that's been a real journey for me, I guess, to have that kind of existential crisis that then leads to an awakening, that then leads to very tangible changes in my life that haven't been okay for everybody who was in my life, I guess, and some of my family. So they've been
very difficult people to understand just what it's like to be within a closed community that is a sort of charismatically run.
Yes.
And it's a very odd experience. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I wouldn't dream of making that judgment. But where I'm based, for example, is a community of people who identify as Orthodox Jew, and they have very few connections with the community outside of themselves. But I've often had kids referred into me because the community itself can't deal with what they've got because of its own hang-ups. And the world view is very shaped, and the idea of how you do relationships is very controlled, and stepping outside of the community is a big deal. It's not something that's done easily or often, really.
Well, absolutely. So everybody who's still in the community is instructed to have no contact.
Yeah.
And that's taken very seriously by family, by people that you've known your whole life. So it is a very clear ostracism, and so that makes for a very different kind of life. So all the people that you've known and had contact with are now. Well, I'm now persona non grata. So yes.
Yeah. What was the sort of, do you mind saying what was the sort of the rupture that happened? How did that come about for you? What sort of made you go, this isn't right for me?
Yeah, good question. Well, in some ways it's very simple. You do this, you do that, and you do the other, and then you're going to be happy. Like that's the kind of, and there's lots of groups that have that kind of strategy. And of course, that wasn't making me happy. So, and I was right in at the center of that community, and I was determined to do, like, I wanted that result. I wanted to feel content, wanted to feel settled. And of course, that wasn't happening for me. So, yeah. I think that was the beginning of the existential crisis, really. And there's a lot of anxiety in my family in terms of, like, clinically, there's a history of what some would describe as bipolar depression. So there's those kind of things going on in the environment too. So, but that group is not set up to take care of those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a lot of charismatic communities. The healing methodology is very closed and overly simplistic, really, and often
Absolutely.
people suffer unnecessarily.
Yes, yeah,
and because of the lack of ability to connect with other communities that maybe have better ways of doing things. I mean, it's interesting. I'm sort of listening to it and I'm thinking about some of my early experiences as a child and sort of my desire to fit in with a group that would sort things out for me, and it never worked because of, obviously now I look back and the upset was inside me, and that's where I needed to go.
Yes,
to deal with who I am, not how the rest of the world is, and that was the sort of big existential crisis in my life, trying to figure that one out, really.
Yeah.
And you're nodding in sort of understanding.
Yes.
Is that what led you into training as a therapist, or did you have your sort of metaphorical years in the sort of wilderness, or how did that come back? Because I can see how, for me, there's a natural progression from that experience to wanting to work in a person-centered way, because it's as far away from that controlling methodology as you can get, right? So.
Well, in a way, it was a little bit more accidental than that, because I had spent so much time volunteering in that community. I built a cleaning business to kind of have a flexible lifestyle, working for myself and volunteering in the community.
It's a very successful cleaning business you had.
Thank you for that. No, thank you.
No, it was. I mean, you were sort of cleaning loads of tenements in Edinburgh. I seem to remember you had half of Edinburgh was your sort of was your client base. I seem to remember.
Yeah, something like that. Absolutely. Well,
you still had the cleaning business when I first.
Yes. Yes.
You were running both, and you were just setting up online events and stuff like that.
That's right.
And then running out to go and clean tenements.
I know.
How in God's name did you do that?
Yes. I came with, it seems like my body arrived here with a little bit extra energy. So I managed to keep myself busy with lots of things. Yeah. But I think I was needing in that an extra intellectual challenge. So although that was providing for me financially, I was looking for something else to do. And I looked at several things, and, through some accidental means, I was having a look at counselling courses, and I did a counselling skills course that was based on a person-centered philosophy. And suddenly I was presented with this idea that actually I don't need to be told what to do, and people don't need to be told what to do. Maybe we've got a lot of that internally. And that was just such a massive culture shock for me, because I was coming from an environment where everything was prescribed, really. And actually that was the way to live. And of course, then I was in this very different environment, which suited me really, because I also wasn't looking to try multiple new ways of living. So I was like, am I going to then examine multiple ideologies, but somehow, and discard them one at a time, almost like, because I've also known people visit different religions or different kinds of groups, and that didn't work. But there was really something about this philosophy of maybe humans can grow in the right environment.
Yeah.
And it's not about a set of rules and instructions. So when I then went on to train professionally as a therapist in the person-centered approach, and I was with my clients in that way, like, because I chose to work with crews in bereavement therapy, particularly because there was no way to shape the outcome for the client. Lots of client presentations, there are ways to kind of find some kind of solution to the presenting problem, but for grief, there's no way to resurrect that person.
Right, you're not that God who can sort of bring somebody back, right?
Exactly. So I was in, well, this is the perfect opportunity to see if this philosophy works, or even can work partly. Like, if I create an environment that is has these things in it, the congruence, the empathy, the unconditional positive regard, will it have a growthful impact on the clients who are coming to see me? And so really, it was very much a laboratory for me, an experiment, my poor clients, of course. But I had no way to know whether that would work, because I had no experience of that really in my life.
And you discovered it does work.
Yes. And of course, I always have my own therapy too, and that approach. And of course, things have changed over the years. I mean, Rogers' sixth condition is about, is the client receiving the therapy in the unconditional positive regard, which also means, I think, that we need to have some kind of formulation of the client.
Yeah, because it's very difficult for somebody with personality disorder to receive that sort of stuff, and unless you do that work as well. And if somebody's psychotic with you, where is the unconditional positive regard going? So I agree, there needs to be additional understandings and maybe workings of other people and other just take that. And I would guess as well, in things like active addiction, you need to sort of think about that, because it's difficult to get through to somebody who's just drunk in a session, for example. It's so there's those types of realities, I think, that need to work to. So I can see that. But I guess that's the point about anything that works, is that there's a level at which it's pragmatic and learns from experience, rather than becomes encoded as a set of directions from God, the next set of commandments, which is always the big problem, isn't it? Sort of people.
Well, it's a real challenge in the person-centered approach, because I think it has been so powerful for so many people. It can become cult-like. And so that was also an interesting process for me. Have I left one coercive experience to move into another? And so,
the same can be said about lots of therapy camps.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely.
It's like there are so many sort of charismatic types that set up a new school of thought and all that sort of stuff, which I find all of it a bit odd, to be honest. That I sort of, we're not there to prove something works. That's not what therapy is about. It's about whether or not we help people, and it's either useful or not in somebody's life. And and I see it again and again. Anyway, I'm not going to get on that soapbox, because
we could really go down that rabbit hole together. I think we would both love that.
Get rid of that.
But I think there's something important about this. Carl Rogers, Fritz Perls, I mean, Beck's still with us. all these men, they're not Jesus Christ.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's really important. And it's like, what is needed in the moment to moment interaction with our clients?
Yeah.
And definitely in the work together that we didn't know, I learned a ton of stuff about, you know, working with clients who are in that process of addiction and have like ingested all of that into my work, you know. So like it started in the, yeah.
But we have to be pragmatic and grounded.
Absolutely.
Yes. Learning all the time. And, you know, there is a strong body of thought that, you know, ultimately those that are any good at what they do end up doing something fairly similar,
Yes.
with unique flavors, of course, but the core set of skills are probably pretty much the same. Because in the end, I don't think, although humans are unique, I think we are unique, but we're not as complicated as we like to think we are. You know,
well, we're often busy making our own lives harder for ourselves. I mean, that's certainly very true.
Necessarily needs to be. Absolutely true.
That's very true of me. I'm always sabotaging myself, and it's like, how can I get out my own way? You know, what is the?
Absolutely. So the other thing that sort of you led the way with was certainly in the UK. Was the move into online work, which I think will broaden out to the concept telehealth, if that's all right, because I think telehealth appropriately sits it within the field that we want to talk about, which is how are we helpful to people, and what ways do we do it? And I can see a natural fit between a person-centered philosophy and the early adoption of telehealth. There's a natural sense, and because for me, telehealth has always been about extending the franchise, as it were, making something more accessible and more helpful. So tell me about how that came about. When did you sort of figure out, oh, telehealth, that's interesting. Online events, yeah, let's do that. What's that story about?
Well, I've always been a bit techie, nerdy, into that kind of stuff. And so I think I went to a conference in Newcastle maybe a year after I finished training, 2006. Kate Anthony was there talking about working online. I just completely fell in love with that idea, did Kate Anthony's course. So by 2007, I had begun to practice working online. But of course, it was too early for video solutions. You know, nobody had the bandwidth for that. So that was all email, IRC, you know, that instant chat, working on things like MSN Messenger and, you know, very, very early days. And I was part of an organization that's still with us called ACTO, which is a professional association for online counsellors. Yeah. And they were putting on the first conference about telehealth in the UK, I guess, working online counselling in 2009. I was dragged onto the organising committee, or it was a real privilege. And we thought, well, this conference is about online working, so it should also be available online.
Makes sense, yeah.
But in 2009, there was no such thing as Periscope or live on YouTube or Facebook Live from your iPhone, or, you know, you almost had to hire the BBC to come in and live stream your conference, which was way beyond the remit of this at that time, very, very small organization. So I asked myself the question that always gets me into trouble, Noel, which is, how hard can this be? So I bought myself a laptop. My dad had a reasonable camera, and I dragged Sandra along, and the three of us managed to get this conference streamed live to a website. Wow. So it was pretty groundbreaking and heretical, I think you could say, in the psychotherapy field.
Yes, that's right. I mean, people don't realise now, because we've just had this year, but you know, the idea of doing therapy online was absolutely horrifying for the vast majority of the profession.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's caused physical fights. I've seen physical fights in conferences.
Yes. Wow.
With people sort of so angry about the idea of doing online computer-based and and believing that approach is goes to the heart of therapy and destroys the heart of therapy, which is it's obviously their stuff, as we would say. That's your baggage, mate. Sort it out. But
yes.
I mean, I think this year has just blown all that out of the water. But
Yes.
it was a really tough environment in which to bring this stuff into it, and must have been quite an uphill struggle initially to sort of, not just the technology, but actually the suspicion and pushback that you would have got professionally. I mean, what was that like in the early days?
Yeah, if we roll back all that time, well, it was a mixture of excitement and also pushback, I guess. So I persuaded Sandra, my sister, that we were going to set up this company called Onlinevents. And we thought there's a real future in this combining learning that happens at conferences and being able to bring in an audience from all around the world. And we also thought, well, this is going to really democratize and open up access to learning. And that was a big value that Sandra and I had. So at that time, I guess we were kind of, well, in the UK, right in the middle of the financial crisis, which really floored a lot of conferences and workshops. So the opportunity to work along with conferences wasn't so available. So what we decided to do was offer events online where we would interview colleagues. So we were doing that on Skype and then streaming that out to our website and then creating a library of that content. And literally hundreds and hundreds of colleagues have very generously donated their time in the form of interviews/conversations that have created a CPD library of almost 1,000 hours now. And of course, Noel, you're one of those colleagues who very generously offered a lot of time and a lot of expertise and a lot of knowledge to that. So colleagues would come and listen to us in conversation, a bit like we're doing this evening, and that would be open learning for colleagues. Yeah.
And also, I guess you were at the same time one of the pioneers in terms of providing therapy online as well, yourself as a therapist. Did you move into online work yourself in that sense?
Well, definitely. Like a couple of years before, around 2007, I started my online practice. I worked for a while in Second Life. I don't know if you remember that, or anybody who's listening, which is still around, which is a kind of game-like environment that has no objectives. So people have lives in this environment, and I ran a practice in there for a while and wrote a chapter about that. That was very interesting. Well, 2007 sounds early, but even 10 years before that, colleagues like Kate Anthony, Colin Lago were writing about this experience of receiving emails from students and being in, like, developing online counselling, online supervision. But I think it's been strange. Every year we would think, we'd put on this conference that we did in 2009, put it on again, and we'd be doing learning and think, oh, this will be the year that online work breaks through. The rest of the community will go, oh, this is great, or the clients will become so demanding for that experience. Yeah. And it never happened. It was really fascinating all the way through my experience, 2007, right up to the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. Both the public and the public who are engaging with counselling and psychotherapy and practitioners en masse didn't really, it wasn't for them, I guess. And
what do you think was the resistance from the various people?
Good question.
Big question.
Good question, yes. Well, I think lots of therapists weren't able to imagine the experience of being in relationship if the client's body wasn't in the same room as them.
Yeah.
So, like, not having had that experience, it was almost beyond imagination, I think. And certainly that was, when I started working, there was a lot of talk about how this is going to be great for cognitive and behavioral kind of ways of working. So I was one a very few person-centered therapists getting into that. So, because there was even the colleagues who were working online, not all of the colleagues for sure. And if any of my colleagues who were around at this time, they would go, John. But there was even in that, there was thinking like, this is a very limited relationship. So, but it was certainly not my experience coming into the field.
What was your experience in terms of when you were developing these relationships with clients? Because I think it is interesting that you were working in a modality that wasn't primarily about psych ed, which psych ed is pretty easy to do online, and that's no big deal. But you weren't doing psych ed; you were doing something where you wanted to be authentic as a human being with another person. And how in God's name do you do that online? I mean, that's an interesting challenge. What was it like?
Well, in those very early days, offering people the experience of those very early days, I'm showing my age. What am I like? No, but yeah, I guess it's very different to now. Clients able to come book a session and suddenly be in a chat environment where they're typing away their experience and I'm responding. And I think what became really clear to me really quickly was, as much as there's so much rich data when we're in the room from the client's body, from the energy that comes from the body, there's almost, I mean, there's no way to quantify this, but it feels like there's almost an equal amount of distractions. And so it felt like it was a very pure form of connection, like consciousness to consciousness.
Right.
So I'm not distracted by the shape of the client's body. Like I'm not the movement of the body. I mean, those are all very rich experiences of data from the client that can really support the client. But there's something about like, what is right at the heart of us? What is our consciousness and how is it operating in the world? And something about those text chats where you could almost go straight there. And I just loved that kind of connection.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I mean, the example I used to have these furious arguments with people about telehealth. The example I would give is the Samaritans. Okay, well, they've been around for a while. And they seem to be pretty good at what they're doing, and they only have a telephone, right? I mean, seriously, what is the argument here? And there were lots of arguments, I think, around increasing access to therapies because online telehealth does. Moving forward a little bit to when video came in and Skype and stuff like that, is that when you thought, right, now is the breakthrough? This is when the world's going to go, yay! Yes.
Well, and it was well past 2010 when like lots of people had a reasonable Skype connection. But still the profession wasn't picking it up en masse. And I think there's also something, and I guess this is a critique of the online counselling community. I think lots of the colleagues really loved the text-based chat and the email exchange, the email-based therapy. And so I think there wasn't the training to support people to use video too, because maybe the colleagues who were early in with the text-based counselling were like, well, that's not quite what we do. And of course, the colleagues who are in the room looking at video thinking, yeah, that's not quite what we do either. So I think there was, video was sitting in a strange place as well. And I think that over the years, there was some kind of creep of where a creep towards practitioners being asked to work with clients on video. So I think just before the pandemic, there was quite a lot of practitioners who were doing a little bit of video work. Yeah. But there wasn't much talk about it. Lots of colleagues not having trained in that medium, but through necessity, needing to, clients were working on business. Maybe a client had moved to a different country, but wanted to stay with the same therapist. So there was kind of almost an underground amount of work going on. So that I think that's also been interesting, and lots of colleagues thinking, well, I've been asked to do it and I'm doing it and I think I'm managing. Should I be training? Is this a vital, like, yeah. So that was also an interesting dynamic in the 2 or 3 years before the pandemic hit.
And what do you think? Should people train in it? Is there good training around on how to, that isn't just technical, like how do you turn a computer on, how do you make sure your microphone works, and which I think you need to learn how to do. And I'm endlessly frustrated when I do these things that I do online and people turn up and they just don't even know, even today, you know, not patients, but professionals, they don't know how to turn the microphone on and change the volume and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's just not okay. You've got to learn the medium in that sense. But what are the other aspects of the medium do you think that people need to sort of get comfortable with? I mean, I've been doing it so long, I can't remember. Sort of, it's always been part of my work. But what would you say are sort of some key points in terms of encouraging people to come on and use it and use it well, I suppose?
Well, the conversation around training is such a hot potato in the world of in the community of online counselling, because lots of colleagues have invested a lot of time and resources to train to be in that, and of course there's always, well, you know, and I know it's around for me that, well, this is what I had to do and this is what I did, and you know, and sometimes I feel that with my own students, you know. It's like, but I think my own feeling is, you know, there's a new set of competencies from the BACP for colleagues whose professional association that is, so that, and those are competencies to meet, but they can be met in different ways. So they could be a full long training, or it could be a mix of workshops and some reading and maybe some peer support.
Well, the truth is that this last year, people have not done the training to go online, they've gone online.
Right.
So that's just a fact, isn't it? There hasn't been enough training, and it happened so quickly, you know, it happened within 24 hours that people were facing the end of their careers unless they went online. And so they sensibly chose to go online. So, I mean, I think the debate about it is over. So we're online. We're
now all online, aren't we? That the adoption finally happened.
That's right.
Finally happened.
You know, and you know, I'm quite relieved it's finally. I don't have to sort of have those silly conversations with people that are waste my time. Like, you should do this. I mean, I'm a great believer that our work is very important and needs to be made accessible in lots of formats. I'm intrigued though as to sort of because I've always been, I don't like therapists. I shouldn't admit that. I think you've frozen, John. Oh, I think he's frozen, hasn't he, James? So we'll just continue. James, do you want to message him? Have you got his number?
On it straight away now.
Right. We'll just see. I think John's gone. He's in the middle of a laugh, so obviously we were getting somewhere. So just if you're still with the broadcast, just wait for John Wilson to rejoin us. He's over in France at the moment. I'm sure he'll come back on. And I will tease him mercilessly, given that he runs an online therapy service and he can't even stay in a Zoom call with me. So that's going to be sort of amusing me when he comes back. But we were just talking about the early days of all this stuff and then the radical changes that happened in terms of online work because of the pandemic and the move on. So we were discussing that there were a lot of resistances from people sort of, and you know, I remain slightly bemused about what those resistances were, to be honest, given that the profession sort of pivoted overnight, as all professions did, and went online. And there has been no outcry from anybody about it, and it sort of belies the fact that people were in a very difficult place about it prior to that. So I'm interested in that in terms of the development of the profession and getting opinions from other people now that are working online and what they plan to do as we come out of the pandemic, whether they're going back to real world or they're going to stay with us online. I'm planning to stay online with my teams because I think it's of great benefit, actually. It gives people much more choices. I was thinking about sort of my experience just as an individual private citizen, as it were. And my GP surgery went telehealth overnight, as they all did in the UK. And I was needed to sort of sort some things out with my GP, but I also had a window of opportunity to go and see my boy and friends. And I found in this new regime, I didn't have to choose between the two. I could do both, which was extraordinary. And it was revolutionary that I could have a chat with my GP and sort out all the stuff that I need to sort out in terms of my health, and also still be with my boy and friends. Hello, welcome back.
Thank you, Noel. Sorry about that.
Mr. Online Events can't stay online with us.
Absolutely. My router just decided it would reboot for a moment. So, yes.
So what can we do with routers, eh?
Yes. Just as I'm waxing lyrical about technology and all the things that I know about working online, boom, out it goes.
Had to happen though, didn't it? Of course.
Absolutely.
So we were just at the point, I was just filling in, padding away rather boringly. And I talked about how, as a private citizen, this last year has been fantastic in terms of getting hold of health services in a way that's accessible. And I gave you a small example of, I needed to sort some things out with my GP, but I also had a small window of opportunity to visit my son in France because of school holidays and things like that. And I ended up being able to do both because my GP's moved to telehealth. That just would never have been possible before. Or if, it would have been a very rare event and, you had to negotiate it in advance and stuff like that. And it's just like the standard norm now. Yeah. One thing that's interested me this year is that we have gone online. The whole profession has pivoted online and there's been no uproar. And there's been none of the arguments that used to exist. That doesn't bother me, but I'm just intrigued as to, because obviously the arguments that people had about the resistances weren't real. Because how could they have been if we've managed to pivot and the whole profession has managed to go online overnight? So they weren't real. And I'm sort of confused these days as to what people were sort of resistant to. And I think there's been a societal issue around the online space in general. And I think as a profession, we've sat within that confusion about the online space. So for me, the online space is something that's here forever. It's not going away. It's only going to grow. My fridge is online. I mean, seriously, you know what I mean? My cooker's online. The idea that this stuff is going away is nonsense.
Absolutely.
And of course, it's shaping how we experience ourselves as human beings, inevitably. In the same way, I would argue that the development of printing presses and universal literacy shaped the experience of being a human being in the 17th, 18th centuries. We're going through one of those changes, is my feeling. You're nodding away.
Yes, I couldn't agree more, Noel. I think I'm reading people who think that, and it just makes sense. We're in the next industrial revolution, and we're heading at speed towards AI and artificial intelligence. So I think it's not just how we live; it's how we're constructed. Over the rest of our lifetimes, things are going to change dramatically, I think, in the world of work.
But it's just happened. It's a fascinating time. And I don't want to talk about the pandemic in just purely academic, I'm interested in these terms. It's been horrific,
It has indeed.
Been horrible, and it continues being horrible around the world. Yes. It's not over by any stretch of the imagination. but it has done what all these events do, is that it's pushed developments that would have taken 10 or 15 years. It's just happened overnight. Okay. And I think we're going to be processing this experience for a long time to come. And it's extraordinary, I think, in a way that the 1918 pandemic, I think, led to things like, well, it did. We know it led to the Roaring Twenties and then to 2 world wars. This is what these types of events do, global events. And that's where we are, I think. And that's what we've now got to face. And my feeling is this, that there was a lot of reaction to things like being involved in Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that if you were a therapist, and lots of stuff about not showing your face and trying to hide who you were because of the transference and all this sort of stuff. And it all seemed a bit nonsense to me, because that is in denial of the reality of the online space. It exists and we exist in it, and we have to have some sort of relationship to it. And it has to be, I think, some sort of self-authored relationship. It has to be authentic. And that's where I experience it, really.
Well, absolutely. And I think this is what is often misunderstood about being online. It is the place of authenticity.
Yeah.
The people who've been the most successful online are the most authentic people. Yeah. And we might not appreciate that authenticity, like their matching of their outsides and their insides might be very different from ours. But I think there's something about the human is calmed by someone who's not lying about who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about, because I've got a 10-year-old boy, his relationship to online space is so natural. Like he's all over it. I mean, he has no problem understanding it and how to work it. And like he has no problem understanding touch control of things and swipes and stuff like that. So I got a new fancy pants Garmin watch to help me go walking and stuff like that. And I was proud of it. And I showed it to him and he tried to operate it by swiping. I said, no, it's too clever for swiping. You have to press buttons. And he's like, buttons? What on earth would you live in a world with buttons for?
Yes.
And all that sort of stuff. And so this generation growing up are going to be much more au fait. I think one of the consequences of this, and I wonder what you think about it, is that not only, and I think, there's been a big shift in terms of people vectoring onto online this last year in our profession. But it's like people have just, I guess, what they mostly have done is just to try and translate as best they can their practice from in real world. So as much as possible, replicate that, which is sort of doomed to failure, really, sort of long term.
Okay.
But there's two elements, I think. The one is, how do we provide online therapy, and how do we understand it, and how do we adapt practice? But also, how do we provide therapy that's relevant to an online experience? And they're not exactly the same thing.
Yes. Well, and also what comes with this, I've recently written a piece of guidance for the BA that's on the BACP website with a colleague about how do we assess clients' suitabilities to move between online and face-to-face work.
Yeah, good.
So, and I think that's the other anomaly in the system. How, clients are probably at some point going to be doing both with lots of therapists. I mean, I work completely online. My colleague does both. So there's a lot to think about here. And it's not just, we can open our offices now. Let's get all the clients back in the offices. Hold on a minute. Like, how do we assess, is this client ready to move from online to face-to-face? What do we need to think about? How are we thinking about that ethically? How are we thinking about it theoretically?
What are the sort of factors you think come into play in it, John?
Well, we were looking at resilience. Is the client able to move between those different spaces in their own life successfully? And I think there's a lot of people and I think you and I know we're doing this for years, like in relationship in lots of different mediums?
Yeah.
Or are we seeing a client that really struggles with change? And like maybe the client really wants to meet us face to face, but if change in the client's life, and maybe we're hearing about that, changes at work, changes in the family, changes in the school system are highly distressing. Maybe someone has, like I have, borderline personality traits.
Yeah.
Like those small changes can have massive impact, even if we want it. So it's like we have to really be thoughtful about those transitions. And what we're looking at, like a two-session assessment model. So making sure that we're assessing for working online and assessing for working in the room.
And would you in the future look at yourself mixing and matching in terms of IRL and online stuff? Is that where you plan to go, or do you plan to stay exclusively online?
Well, in terms of my own personal lifestyle, I'm going to stay for the foreseeable future online. I've had, up until the pandemic struck, quite a nomadic lifestyle in terms of my work. So it doesn't make it possible to be in the same place for clients all the time. And I've been working like that completely since 2017. And
I think it sort of fits with a lot of people's experience these days as well. And that many of us are working in these sort of mixed forums and sort of having to try and make some sort of sense of that, some cohesive explanation to ourselves of what all that means. And what are the places where we touch base now? And I think there's, this last year in terms of how we perceive ourselves as humans has grown. And, many people, for example, talk about, I don't want to go back to normal. Like there's a lot about this. And we were talking just before the show, James was talking about having had an experience of commuting recently and just sort of freaking out a little bit because of it. And then remembering that actually that's not very pleasant, the experience of traveling to something. And also, I think with our clients, maybe they've got used to this idea that I don't need to spend an hour on the tube getting to my therapist, to spend an hour with them, and then to go home taking an hour. That this is more convenient in one sense. I also think that there are aspects of online work which makes it more effective in some ways as well, not just convenient. And you talked about this sort of people who have the capacity to be to experience change as difficult, but also underlying that is something around anxiety and anxiety disorders and phobic responses. But also there's issues around people that find that they have difficulties in relating to other people in real world, or aspects of self that can't find authentic voice in real life. Whereas I think in an online space, you can create places for people and personas for people, which allows them to sort of explore those safely, maybe much more safely than in the room with you in some ways.
Absolutely. When I was working in Second Life, the client would then shape and dress their avatar in the way that reflected an aspect of themselves that they would maybe never find the words for in a face-to-face, a kind of encounter where both therapist and client are in the room. And it was counterintuitive for lots of people, because people would think that the human then would represent themselves in the most culturally beautiful way. But that wasn't the case. People really wanted to express how they felt inside that didn't match their physical presence. And that was very, very rich for the therapy.
Yeah, we are sort of unfortunately coming to the end. I knew we'd have a lot to talk about and a lot of stuff to cover. And I think there's been a bit of a quick jump into what's happened in the last year, because I think it's been such a radical change. What's sort of it looking like in terms of if people want to get hold of you? What's the website? What sort of events have you got coming up that people might want to jump into? And particularly, I guess, for professionals who've had to vector into online work, who might be looking for good sort of CPD and training around how to use these spaces more effectively. Where would you point them at in terms of the work that you're doing?
If people search for online events through Google or onlineevents.co.uk, I had the brainstorm of only having one E in the middle when we set up the company. So people Google online events, which you say online events.
We'll put the link in the description.
Lovely.
As well.
Thank you.
Have you got any events coming up that you want to sort of highlight with people so that they might jump in and have a look?
Yes, well, myself and my co-author Kate Dunn are going to workshop that idea around a 2-session assessment model and how we think about moving between face-to-face and online. So we're going to do that in May. We've also got a really excellent series of workshops around the polyvagal theory that we've been running successfully for the last couple of years, and we're just about to start another run of that. So I think, and that's a very practical look at how that complex theory can be helpful in a no-nonsense kind of way in the therapy room. So we definitely look out for them too.
Great. So we'll put all those details going out. It's been great to have you on the show, John. Really good to catch up with you. I hope to see you in real life sometime in the not too distant future. But in reality, even prior to the pandemic, we were like ships passing in the night. So our online connection, our messages and all that sort of stuff are about as far as it gets most of the time, whether there's a pandemic on or not, to be honest.
It's been a real pleasure for me
now than I have in years. So.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me, Noel. Thank you for the conversation.
And really, really interesting to hear from you. You stay there while I wrap up the show. Thanks everybody for joining us. John's a great guy. The services are amazing. So I sort of highly recommend that you check them out, particularly as this is the way it is now, folks. And get used to it and sort of learn about it, and let's make these spaces even better. Great to have you all here. I'll see you all again next week by the magic of online worlds. I'll be in a completely different country, but I'll still be here. And it's been great to have you all, and see you all next week. Bye-bye.